never believed a single look could change the way I saw myself, until she looked at me, like I was the only one in the world. It started in the kind of moment most people would forget. The room was alive with chatter, clinking cups, half-finished conversations, people weaving in and out of each other's laughter. I was there, but not really a part of it. Just another guest, blending into the background. I had no idea the night would stay with me forever, because of her. I noticed her before she noticed me. She carried herself with a quiet certainty, the kind of confidence that doesn't need to prove itself. There was grace in her steps, a stillness in her posture. The people around her leaned in when she spoke, as though her voice had a pull of its own. And yet, for all that presence, there was also something softer about her, something unspoken, just beneath the surface, like a secret she kept carefully guarded. And then, her eyes found mine. It wasn't a glance. Not the quick kind you exchange when you accidentally catch someone's attention. No, it was something deeper. Her gaze held steady, long enough to make the noise of the room fall away. For a heartbeat, it felt like everyone else blurred into the background and there was only her, and me. I should have looked away. Maybe I even tried to. But the truth is, her eyes had a weight that didn't let me. They weren't sharp or searching. They were warm in a way that reached right past my defenses and settled in my chest. And in that warmth, there was a strange, almost impossible feeling, like I mattered. Like, in a room full of people, she had chosen to see me. I remember the tiniest details, the faint curve of her lips that wasn't quite a smile but wasn't far from one. The way the light caught the edges of her hair, softening her face in a way that made her look both strong and gentle at once. My chest tightened, not with nerves, but with a kind of weightless calm, as if her gaze was saying, "It's all right. You can just be." I've met many people, spoken to countless faces that passed in and out of my life. But this was different. This wasn't someone noticing me by accident, this felt like recognition. As though she'd been expecting me, even though we'd never spoken before. I didn't know her story. I didn't know her laughter yet, or the things that might keep her awake at night. But in that first look, she gave me something rare, the feeling of being the only one in the world. And once you feel that, you can't go back. So while the night carried on around us, while the conversations rose and fell, I sat there quietly, still feeling the echo of her eyes on mine. And a thought I couldn't shake whispered at the back of my mind, "This is the beginning of something I'll never forget." The second time our paths crossed, it wasn't with silence or stolen glances, it was with words. And somehow, those words carried more weight than any conversation I'd had in a long time. We weren't alone, people were still scattered around us. But it felt as if she and I were drifting toward the same quiet corner, drawn by something neither of us had spoken out loud. Maybe it was coincidence. Maybe it wasn't. She asked me something simple at first, about the coffee, the music playing softly in the background, the kind of question anyone could ask anyone. But the way she looked at me while waiting for my answer, that made it different. Her eyes didn't dart away. They lingered. She gave me the space to finish my thought, as if she wasn't rushing to get to her turn to speak. And that, I realized, is rare. Most people listen to reply. She listened to hear. And when she laughed, low, unhurried, like it rose from somewhere genuine, I felt the sound settle into the spaces between us, warm and lasting. Her hand rested on the table near mine. Not close enough to touch, but close enough for me to feel its presence, like a subtle pull I couldn't ignore. Every time her fingers shifted slightly, adjusting her bracelet, tracing the rim of her glass, I caught myself noticing. And then catching myself noticing. I told myself not to read too much into it. She was older, self-assured in ways I was still learning to be. Surely, this was just kindness, nothing more. But then her voice softened, just slightly, when she leaned in to ask me something about myself. And suddenly, the conversation felt personal. She wanted to know what I was studying, what I was working toward. She listened carefully, and when I admitted the doubts I sometimes carried, she didn't dismiss them. Instead, she said quietly, almost to herself, "I know how that feels." That moment, it stayed. Because in her words, I heard not just understanding but experience, years of carrying her own doubts, her own quiet battles. And still, she had this strength, this calm presence. I wanted to ask her everything. About her life, her dreams, the places she'd been, the people she'd loved. But I held back, afraid of revealing too much of my own curiosity, afraid of seeming like I was reaching too far. Instead, I listened. I watched. I memorized the way her laughter faded into silence, leaving behind a kind of glow in the air. By the time someone interrupted us, calling her name, pulling her attention away, I realized I was sitting there in silence, not because I had nothing to say, but because I wanted the moment to last. And as she turned back to me briefly, offering a small smile before she left to join the others, I felt it again, that strange certainty. This wasn't just a passing conversation. This was the beginning of something that would linger long after the words themselves were gone. It was later that evening when the world outside had grown darker, and the room around us had begun to thin out. People were saying their goodbyes, drifting into the night with promises to call, to meet again. The atmosphere had quieted, leaving only the hum of a few voices and the faint scrape of chairs being tucked away. Somehow, she and I ended up side by side, walking out into the evening air. The transition was almost seamless, as though we had both silently agreed not to let the night end just yet. The air was cool, carrying that freshness that only comes after sunset. The street was quiet, washed in the golden glow of the lamps above. We walked slowly, without the rush that usually fills those kinds of moments. Her pace matched mine perfectly, as if we were moving in rhythm without trying. And then it happened, a simple, ordinary thing, yet it made my heart beat louder. Our shoulders brushed. It wasn't deliberate. Or maybe it was. But she didn't move away. Instead, her hand shifted ever so slightly, grazing my arm as though steadying herself against a stumble that never really happened. It was the lightest touch, but it left a weight behind. I could feel it long after her fingers had slipped back to her side. I wanted to believe it was accidental, but the softness in her expression when I glanced at her told me otherwise. She didn't look embarrassed. She didn't even look away. She just gave the faintest smile, the kind you give when words aren't necessary. And in that silence, I wondered if she could feel it too, the pull, the unspoken current moving between us. We talked a little, though the words barely mattered. She asked about my family, I asked about hers. She spoke about how quickly life changes, how easily moments slip away if you're not paying attention. And I found myself listening more to the rhythm of her voice than the actual sentences. At one point, as we reached the edge of the path, she slowed. Her hand brushed mine again, this time so softly it could have been an accident, but it lingered a fraction longer than before. My pulse stumbled. I didn't dare close my hand around hers, not yet. The hesitation was stronger than the desire. A part of me was terrified of misreading her, of crossing into a space she hadn't invited me into. But another part, the quieter, braver part, whispered that maybe she had already invited me, just without words. When she finally pulled her hand back, the absence of it was louder than the touch itself. And though we kept walking, side by side, my thoughts were no longer on the street or the night air. They were on that delicate brush of her fingers, and the way even the smallest nearness could feel like the start of something impossible to ignore. The night stretched on, and little by little the noise of the day faded away. By the time most people had gone, the house was quiet, the kind of quiet that makes every sound sharper, every silence more meaningful. I found myself in the kitchen, rinsing a few glasses, trying to keep my hands busy. She stepped in not long after, carrying a plate, her movements unhurried, graceful in a way that made even something as ordinary as setting dishes down feel intentional. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The air between us felt different now, less like two people making small talk, and more like a space where honesty might finally have room to breathe. She leaned against the counter, arms folded loosely, eyes tracing the dark window as though she was seeing something far beyond it. Then she said, quietly, "Do you ever feel invisible? Like you move through a room and no one really sees you?" The question caught me off guard. It wasn't the kind of thing you ask a casual acquaintance. It was the kind of truth you offer when you're tired of holding it alone. I dried my hands slowly, unsure how to respond. "Sometimes," I admitted. "More often than I'd like to admit, actually." She nodded, as if my answer didn't surprise her. Her gaze shifted back to me, and in her eyes I saw something unguarded, something that hadn't been there before. Vulnerability. "I spend so much of my life holding everything together," she said. "Being strong, being steady. People assume I don't need anything. But sometimes I just wish someone would look at me and really see me." Her words hung in the air, heavy and delicate all at once. I wanted to move closer, to reach for her hand, to bridge the distance between us. But I hesitated, afraid of breaking the moment, afraid of overstepping. So instead, I stood still, letting the honesty of her confession settle inside me. Her fingers absently played with a ring on her hand, twisting it back and forth. It was a small, nervous gesture that betrayed what her voice kept steady. And without thinking too much, I reached out, letting my hand rest gently over hers. The motion was slow, careful, giving her the chance to pull away if she wanted. But she didn't. Her fingers stilled beneath mine, and for a breathless second, it felt like time itself had paused. She looked down at our hands, then back at me. And though she didn't say anything more, the silence spoke enough. I didn't need her to explain what she was feeling. I could feel it in the way her hand softened under mine, in the way her eyes shimmered just slightly, as though holding back more than words. That night, in that quiet kitchen, I realized something. Closeness doesn't always come in the form of grand gestures or perfect timing. Sometimes, it's in the quiet honesty of being seen, and choosing to see someone in return. When the night drew to a natural close, there was no announcement, no official ending. Just the gradual quiet that comes when conversations taper off and people drift away. The house had grown still, the soft hum of the refrigerator the only sound breaking the silence. She gathered her things slowly, as though she wasn't in a hurry to leave, and I found myself lingering too, unwilling to let the moment slip away. We stood near the doorway, the faint glow of a lamp casting warm shadows across the room. She slipped her coat over her shoulders, graceful in even the smallest of movements, and turned toward me with that half-smile that always seemed to hold more than it revealed. "Thank you," she said softly, though for what, I wasn't entirely sure. "For listening, maybe. For being there. For noticing." Her voice carried a tenderness that settled deep in my chest. I opened my mouth to respond, but the words caught, too small compared to the swell of feeling rising inside me. And then instinct took over, quiet, steady, almost unthinking. As she adjusted the strap of her bag, my hand reached out, lightly catching hers. It was a simple gesture, but the effect was immediate. She paused. Her hand stilled beneath mine, warm, soft, and impossibly delicate. I expected her to pull away, to laugh it off, to let the moment vanish before it had a chance to mean anything. But she didn't. Instead, she let her hand remain there, resting against mine as though it belonged. Her fingers shifted slightly, not to escape, but to curl just a little tighter around my palm. And in that quiet, in that fragile stillness, the world outside seemed to fall away. I could feel the warmth of her skin, the faint texture of her ring brushing against my fingers, the steady calm of her presence flowing into me through that single point of contact. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't rushed. It was simply real, two hands, holding each other in a way that said more than words could ever manage. I looked up, and there she was, watching me. Her gaze was soft but unflinching, carrying something unspoken yet undeniable. It wasn't playful. It wasn't casual. It was a quiet acceptance, as though she had been waiting for me to find the courage to reach out all along. For a moment, the world pressed in, the age difference, the unspoken questions, the fear of what others might think. But none of that mattered in the space between her eyes and mine. In her gaze, there was no judgment, no hesitation, only a warmth that told me this wasn't wrong. It was human. It was honest. Her fingers tightened just slightly, enough to let me know this was real. Enough to silence the doubts in my mind. And in that moment, holding her hand beneath the soft glow of the lamp, I realized something simple yet profound. Sometimes, the most powerful beginnings don't announce themselves with fireworks. Sometimes, they arrive in silence, in the steady, lingering touch of a hand that chooses not to let go. We stood there longer than either of us probably expected. Her hand resting in mine, her presence filling the quiet space between us. I thought it would end with that, a brief, unspoken moment of connection. But instead, something shifted. She turned fully toward me, her body angled just enough that the distance between us felt impossibly small. The lamplight caught her features in a way that softened them, casting a gentle glow across her face. I had seen her smile, I had heard her laugh, but now it was her eyes that held me captive. She looked at me with a steadiness that made my breath falter. It wasn't the kind of look you give when you're curious, or even when you're drawn to someone. It was deeper, deliberate, unguarded, as though she had chosen this moment to let me see all the things she kept hidden from the rest of the world. And in that gaze, I felt everything else disappear. The hum of the refrigerator, the muffled sounds outside, even the tick of the clock on the wall, all of it faded until the only thing that existed was her. Her breath, slow and even, brushed faintly against my skin. The warmth of her hand pressed firmly into mine. The faintest tremor at the corner of her lips, as though words hovered there but refused to leave. I wanted to speak, to tell her what she was doing to me, how her presence filled me with a mixture of calm and fire I couldn't explain. But words felt clumsy, too heavy for a moment this fragile. So instead, I just held her gaze, letting the silence say everything neither of us dared to. She didn't look away. Not once. And the longer her eyes stayed on mine, the stronger the feeling grew inside me, that she wasn't just looking at me. She was looking into me, past all the surfaces I showed the world, into a place I didn't even know someone else could reach. I felt unworthy and chosen all at once. Exposed yet safe. It was overwhelming, yet grounding, like standing still in the center of a storm. For a brief, dizzy second, I thought she might close the last inch between us, and I wasn't sure if I would be brave enough to stop her, or foolish enough to let her. My pulse stumbled, my chest tightened, and every fiber of me seemed to wait for something I couldn't name. But she didn't move closer. She just held me there, suspended in that gaze, letting me know, without a single word, that she had seen me. Truly seen me. And that, somehow, was enough. When she finally exhaled, it felt like the world slowly returned, sound and movement seeping back into the room. Yet even as reality crept in, I knew the moment had marked me forever. Because once someone looks at you like that, as though you are the only one in the world, nothing ever feels the same again. When the spell of her gaze finally loosened, I half expected her to step back, to pull her hand away and let the night end with nothing more than an almost. But she didn't. She stayed there, close enough for me to feel the warmth radiating from her, close enough for me to hear the subtle rhythm of her breathing. Her eyes softened, the intensity of a moment ago giving way to something gentler, something steadier. And then, without words, she moved just slightly closer, closing the last of the space between us. Her head came to rest lightly against my chest. It was such a simple gesture, no grand declaration, no dramatic pause, but it carried a weight I can't quite describe. The softness of her cheek against me, the quiet trust in the way she let herself lean in, it was everything. For a second, I froze, unsure if I had the right to hold her. But instinct took over, and my arms lifted slowly, carefully, wrapping around her in a way that wasn't about possession, but about presence. About saying, I'm here. You don't have to be alone in this moment. She let out the faintest sigh, one I might have missed if she hadn't been so close. It wasn't heavy, not weary, it was more like release. As though she had been holding herself together all evening, maybe for years, and now, just for this moment, she could let go. I could feel the steady beat of her heart through the thin space between us, a rhythm that synced with my own. I noticed the faint scent of her perfume lingering in the air, something floral, something warm. Every detail etched itself into me, the curve of her hand resting lightly against my back, the way her shoulders softened as she leaned into me, the unspoken permission in her stillness. The doubts that had haunted me, the age between us, the questions of how this could work, the imagined voices of everyone who might not understand, all of it melted away. In that moment, none of it mattered. Because the truth was simple, it wasn't about who we were supposed to be, or how the world might see us. It was about the way she chose to be here, with me, and the way I couldn't imagine being anywhere else. We didn't need to speak. Words would have felt too fragile, too heavy for the delicacy of what was unfolding. Instead, we just stood there, wrapped in a quiet that felt less like silence and more like belonging. When she finally pulled back, it wasn't far, just enough to look up at me. Her eyes carried the same warmth they had held all evening, but now there was something more. A certainty. A softness that said, without speaking, this is real. This is ours. And as I looked back at her, I knew one thing with absolute clarity: no matter what tomorrow would bring, I would never forget the night she looked at me like I was the only one in the world, and then proved, in the simplest of ways, that maybe I was.